This morning I want to look at the story of the rising of Lazarus using a spiritual or metaphorical lens to present 5 ways in which we are called to listen up to God when confronted by spiritual death in the world around us. 5 ways. 3 of these ways are spoken by Jesus to those who are mourning the spiritual death of someone they love. 1 of the ways is spoken by Jesus to the person who has died a spiritual death. And 1 of the ways is spoken by Jesus to the community who has received a resurrected child of God into their midst. But before we get to these 5 ways in which we are called to listen up, and I have provided an insert for you to follow along with me, but before we get there, let's wonder for a moment what spiritual death is. What do I mean when I say spiritual death? What does it mean to be spiritually dead? This is what I think it means. Spiritual death happens in the human heart through a variety of ways. There's no one way to have our heart shrivel up and die. I wonder if anyone has ever felt that. Their heart has just kind of died a little on the inside. Maybe it was due to the loss of a loved one, the weariness of a long illness, the isolation that happens when we age, the loneliness that we face when we need to make a difficult situation. Spiritual death can creep up on all of us in a variety of ways, but the death itself is marked by a sense of hopelessness, that there's no future, that all is lost. The death is marked by despair and cynicism, that there's no use on trying or participating in life in a meaningful way, because what's the point? I wonder if you've ever felt that way. Spiritual death is marked by disengagement, a sitting out of the world and kind of letting things just go on their own way. And of course, in its fullness, spiritual death is seen most clearly in the human pursuit of war, isn't it? And violence, division, and using people as a means for one's own end. That's someone who has died spiritually in their heart. Spiritual death is a terrible thing. And it's why God sent his Son, Jesus Christ, into the world. Did you know that? That in Jesus we have a response by God to the spiritual death looming over humanity. In Jesus we have God's antidote to the poison, God's inoculation to the virus. As followers of Jesus, we have in our own ways been transformed by the life of Jesus, who has called each of us out of our own graves to join him in his work of resurrection. I wonder if there's anyone here who has been made alive by Jesus Christ. We are all of us front-line workers in a world suffering from spiritual death. And I want to tiptoe through the story of Lazarus this morning to consider how we might better work with God in bringing life into the world, and even if only briefly, what we need to listen for when we find ourselves drawn to the grave of our own spiritual death. I wonder if you know someone who is close to a spiritual death, overwhelmed by life circumstances. Do you know someone who's displaying signs of hopelessness and powerlessness? Let's tiptoe through this story. Walk with me through this story. It's printed on your insert. When Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved, and he said, "Where have you laid him?" Again, Jesus said, "Where have you laid him?" This is the first thing God says, that Jesus says to us who are faced with the spiritual death of someone we love. God says, don't walk away from them. Walk toward them. This is number one. Walk toward them. Don't throw the person who is experiencing a spiritual death, don't throw them out. Don't disregard them because they are deadened with fear and anxiety. Don't throw a member of your family out because they don't go to church. Don't push them out of your mind even though they are so dead in their hearts that they're even fighting against you and the world. When you when you encounter someone who is dying spiritually, go to where they are laying. There's a difficult spiritual truth here as well. Because sometimes the loved one who is going through a spiritual death is there because of something we did. Jesus said, "Where have you laid them?" Our children, our grandchildren, our parents who suffer due to a loss of hope and wonder and joy in the world are often there because of something we did or didn't do. And of course, don't get hung up on this, right? Don't get so distracted by what you have done that may have led them to a place of spiritual death that causes you to be overwhelmed with your own anxiety and fear. Acknowledge it, but go to them. Acknowledge what you've done. Confess it. Do that, of course, but don't get overwhelmed by it. Don't brood over your role in the problems of the world. Instead, use that energy and go to where you have laid them. Let them know that they are on the forefront of your mind and on your heart. Even though they may have given up on God, on hope, on Jesus, on the future, remind them that you are right with them in their spiritual night and you're not going anywhere. Let's practice. Can you turn to someone next to you and you tell them, you look at them in their beautiful eyes and you say, "I'm not going anywhere." Go to the place where they lay. Will you follow the story with me again? They said to Jesus, "Lord, come and see." Jesus began to weep. Isn't it beautiful? Jesus shows us how God responds to human suffering. Not as an indifferent, passionless, divine, far-off entity, but as a compassionate and merciful empath who is near to us in our darkest nights, and for those who need to hear this, is with your children and your grandchildren, though they might have rejected the faith, the church, or so-called religion. God weeps with us who mourn the spiritual deaths of those we love. Listen to God weeping. This is the second way to listen up. Listen to God weeping. Weeping for the world and weeping for those you love. And why don't we join him? Let's weep right alongside Jesus. Weep for those whom you love and see no longer in Christian community. Mourn for those who have given up hope and faith and love. Stand next to them where they lay and weep with them. This is the second way to listen up. Number two, weep with them, or in other words, show compassion. Don't go up to someone whose spiritual lamp is dimming and chastise them. Don't wag your finger. Show them the same compassion God has shown you. Weep with them and for them. Let's continue. So the Jews said, "See how he loved them?" But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" Then Jesus, again greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. And Jesus said, and if you're with me in the story, say it with me. Jesus said, "Take away the stone. I love this thing that Jesus says. Jesus says, take away the stone. That is, Jesus turns to those who have placed the spiritually dead heart in the tomb, and after he's done his weeping, he asks those who are with him to remove the thing that has become an obstacle to life in the way of the person in the tomb. In other words, we need to pay attention to the reasons why Lazarus is dead. Maybe Lazarus is dead because he cared so much for the world around him, but never saw anything get better and better and better, and his hope eroded until it was gone completely and his heart shriveled up and died. Has anyone ever been there? If so, take away that stone. Show the Lazarus in your life the good news of God's kingdom in the world. How followers of Jesus do continue to feed the hungry, clothe the naked, visit the imprisoned, and heal the sick. Maybe Lazarus is dead in his heart because he went to church one Sunday and he heard that God doesn't like certain people because of their political affiliation, of their socioeconomic status, of their culture, or their sexual orientation or gender identity. And it broke Lazarus' heart because he fit into one of those categories. So he went home, lay down, and his spirit died. Do you know anyone who has had this experience? If so, take that stone away for them. Go up to where he lay and whisper in their ears, I am so sorry someone lied to you. You are God's beloved child, and nothing can separate you from the love of God. I may not know every reason why the Lazaruses of the world die in their hearts, but my job as a listener of Jesus is to go where they lay broken and dying and remove the stone that keeps them there. The third way we can listen to Jesus, number 3, is to remove the obstacles that lay in the way of those who are spiritually dead and dying, even though, by the way, it's a really stinky thing to do. Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, Lord, there is already a stench because he has been dead for 4 days. It's tough to face the stench of death, especially when we're implicated in that death. It's tough, for example, to remove the stone keeping residential school survivors locked up in their suffering. It's tough to remove the stone of spiritual abuse that keeps other people entombed. It's a messy to face it. It stinks, but we have to face it because God told us to. And we're going to listen up. Jesus said to her, to Martha, did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? So they took away the stone. Did you know that's in 6 lines, the good news of Jesus Christ encapsulated? So they took away the stone. And Jesus looked upwards and said, Father, I thank you for having heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I have said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so that they may believe that you sent me. And when he had said this, he cried out with a loud voice. Can you say it with me? Lazarus, come out. Just a quick note here. This is a moment in the story when Jesus speaks to the dead man, to the one who has died, to the one whose heart has grown anxious and afraid and alone. Oh, what good news I have to share this morning. Did you know God is always speaking to his children, whether they be dead or alive? God doesn't cast anyone away for any reason, but continues to pursue them with his undying love for them. Did you know this? But it's up to the person in the tomb to listen to his voice. We can do all we must to help them hear, but by being at the tomb of their life, weeping over them and removing whatever obstacle that is blocking their life, but it is up to them to listen to the voice of God. We can't force anyone to hear. We can't force anyone to live again. And do you know what? We don't want to. We don't want to control people. That might be why they died in the first place, by the way. We tried to control them. No, we must let those who have died in their hearts spiritually to take responsibility for their own response to God's voice calling them to life. Surrender them to God. Give them to God. God will take care of your children and your grandchildren and all your friends and neighbors, all the family that you love but you don't see here. God will take care of them. This is the fourth point. God speaks to the spiritually dead person, and it is up to the spiritually dead person to listen up. This is number 4. Listen up. It's up to you to listen if you're feeling a little dead in your heart. It's up to you to reach out and take the life that God has set before you. God's not going to force it on you. And God's children, I hope, have stopped forcing God on God's other children. If you're feeling dead in your heart today, listen to the good news of God in this place. Come out of your tomb. Come and eat the bread of life. Come and drink the cup of salvation. Come find healing in prayer and community. Listen up. Listen up. One more thing. The last lines of our story. Could you read this with me? The dead man. The dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with strips of cloth, and his face wrapped in a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." Jesus again speaks to the community surrounding the spiritually dead person who has dared to open their ears to God's voice. Jesus says to the community, "Unbind him and let him go." That is, in other words, help the newly spiritually alive person that has come into your presence to remove those things that restrict them and set them free to live the life that God has created them to live. If someone has been dead in their heart because they have believed in God as a monster out to destroy them, then unbind that person from that bad theology and help them live more freely before their Creator who loves them and celebrates their life with them. If God has been dead in the hearts of someone because of spiritual trauma, guide them to the counselor that they need, a trusted member of the faith community who can walk with them and talk with them and encourage them. If someone has been dead in their hearts because they are afraid of the future, take their hand and let them know that they don't face the future alone. Unbind them and let them go. Number 5 is just be a friend and helper like Jesus. This is our ministry. This is our calling, to support people who are living the life that God has given them, not by entangling them or controlling them, but unbinding them and letting them go. I wonder, when I talk about someone who is spiritually dead, who comes to your mind? You don't have to say them out loud. In fact, please don't. When I talk about someone who is spiritually dead, does someone come to your mind? Someone who has lost hope, is looking into the future and seeing only bleakness and sadness. Someone who's lost the capacity to love and to trust. Maybe it's a family member, a friend, a neighbor, a colleague. Maybe it's your own dear heart. Listen to this, dear beloved children of God. We have a message of grave importance. It's to go out into the graveyards of life, the places of despair, sadness, loneliness, fear, and all the rest, and share with them the life of Christ that we have been given. And if we dare to do this, my friends, we will see the dead rise out of their graves. In the name of Jesus Christ, the risen Lord. Amen.